What I'd rather do is be honest with this of I tend to be passive, and I don't think I do much passive aggressive really, very rarely, but I think that sometimes I can shift into aggressive if I've been passive for too long.
Yes.
And so I don't think I do passive aggressive. I think I do passive or aggressive. And I do think that most of the time when I'm resourceful, I'm assertive or centered or effective. Yeah.
And so when I interact with this person, very often is it really cordial and fun and light and kind of like levity. But like after you leave an interaction with someone who's passive aggressive, you kind of find yourself being, what the heck just happened? Conscious couples, business partners, and singles committed to attracting their dream partner. Welcome to the Conscious Couples podcast, where we share our life, love story, and combined relationship expertise to help you create and consistently cultivate the most magnificent, intimate relationship possible.
Never again will you feel hopeless and alone in your intimate relationship challenges.
Having accumulated thousands of hours coaching conscious couples and individuals all over the world, as well as starting and growing a global business together, Alan and I are here to guide you in all things relationships.
Thank you again for tuning into the one place where it's not about you or me, it's about the we. Conscious couples and individuals, welcome back to another very special episode of the one and only Conscious Couples podcast. Today we have episode 156. This may or may not be the third time I've read this. What's your go-to communication style? As always, we want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Next Level Podcast Solutions for producing this show and so many others. I talked to Kevin today, my business partner. We now work with 67 podcasters between group coaching and our production. It is truly unbelievable. Personal growth, personal development, self-improvement, fitness, mental health. We are spreading so many good messages into the world, and it's very exciting. As always, my love, ladies first, what is your intention for today's episode? Because this is based on something that you brought to two of our potential clients recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of couples, when they come to us, the surface level, it's very easy to pinpoint that they have communication issues. So my intention for this episode is to help get a layer underneath that for anyone listening to this episode, and to have our listeners take away from this episode what their go-to communication style is, and moreover, how that's impacting the way in which their relationship is essentially growing together or consistently growing apart.
So earlier today, I talked to you about the iceberg concept. How from now on, did I?
It was yesterday.
Last night. Okay. I talked to Kevin about it today. Every time when I see a human being, a couple or a person, I'm going to see an iceberg. I'm going to see what they're showing. I think there's the social world and then there's the real world. Picture the wedding day versus the actual marriage. And everyone's wedding day looks magnificent. Not everyone's marriage is magnificent.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality. Everyone's social media looks great. Behind the scenes, not so great necessarily. Okay, we all know that. That's human nature. I'm not making that wrong. I'm just calling a spade a spade. So whenever I see the tip of an iceberg, I want to know what's underneath it. And that's what Relationship Talks coaching is. It's let's get underneath. So on the surface, it looks like you're having communication challenges. Okay, what's underneath that and why? So we have two new potential clients. Very exciting. We will keep it anonymous, as always, but we were on our first consultation session, and they were having challenges in communication, and Emilia pulled up not only her Remarkable, which is her notepad, but also this digital asset that she's going to read from here, where it talks about the 4 different types of communication styles and how one of them is very conducive and constructive to growing together, not apart, and the other 3 are potentially damaging.
Yeah, and so it's not this couple that was having this challenge, but it is, in general terms speaking, a very common challenge that a lot of us have. And the through line that I wanted to share with this couple was that when you are having communication styles, it is because of the patterns of the way in which you communicate. And the way in which you communicate can be, for lack of better words, categorized into one of 4 different categories. Are there more? Yes. But to keep things very simple, we pulled up this digital asset. And this digital asset essentially highlighted every single individual category of how you communicate. And then we'll give an example of that. So the first category is passive. If you are a passive communicator, likely you're not communicating a lot. Or if you are, you're doing so very quietly, and you're doing so more often than not at the expense of your needs. So what does this actually look like? In real time, when you're with your partner, you're emotionally distant. You might be, indirect when there might be an issue or a challenge, or if you're experiencing an emotion or something's bothering you. You're indirect, you're not necessarily talking about it. You usually sweep it underneath the rug, and you're hoping, for lack of better words, that your partner notices and brings it up to you. Hey, babe, what was that? Like, I noticed there was an energy shift. You didn't really say much there. What's going on there? That's what a passive communication style really looks like, where they're not saying much. And if anything, when they are talking or when they are communicating to their partner, what is likely coming out is more so from a frame of self-denying. And so whatever needs or wants or desires or things that are bothering them, they deny that it bothers them to the level that it really does.
Do you have any clients that you think, and again, I want to make this as clear as possible, we all have a unresourceful go-to and then a resourceful go-to. So the resourceful go-to, let's imagine two people that are both in great moods, that are both fulfilled and most of their needs are met, and they're all both getting great sleep and fit and happy and healthy and productive. They most likely are. What's the good one? The good one is, can you define
the
that?
good one is just assertive.
Okay.
So it's quite the opposite of this. So where someone might be passive and their needs really are not being met and they're not communicating those needs, they're just sweeping it underneath the rug, hoping that someone's...
So describe someone who's assertive.
Someone that's assertive, they are communicating so effectively that by the time you're done communicating, both parties understand where the needs, where the boundaries, and what the wants are after you're done communicating. So someone that is assertive, they're communicating honestly what their needs, their wants, their desires, what bothers them, not at an inflated level, but also not at a deflated level. It's literally just so truthful and so aligned and like, this is who I am. And they're not afraid to acknowledge what is going on. They're just saying it how it is. That's assertive communication. There's boundaries around there. It's also empathetic that the other person also has different needs, wants, desires, etc. But it doesn't say, let me put your needs above mine.
Okay.
And it doesn't also say, my needs are the most important in this relationship, and I don't really give a shit about yours.
Okay. All right. So in this metaphor, I really want to try to bring this full circle here. Mm-hmm. We have a turtle shell, which is someone who's passive and hides whenever they're struggling and they don't courageously communicate their needs. Then you have a puffer fish, which is aggressive. Mm-hmm. And aggressive is like, hey, I need my way or the fucking highway. Let's roll. Okay. And then there's passive aggressive, which is the turtle puff, which is someone who turtles up and then all of a sudden it's a volcano.
Yeah.
All human beings float between these three, but we all have a go-to when we're unresourceful. Okay. So imagine someone is hungry and tired and in a bad state and they had a long day and they come home and they are struggling. Most likely they tend to be either passive, aggressive, or passive aggressive. Okay. If two human beings in a couple are both centered and got great sleep, happy, healthy, productive, fulfilled, coming off of a great vacation, let's say, they're most likely going to both be resourceful and assertive and effective at communicating. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
Okay.
All emotions and emotional experiences are managed with and dealt with in that communication, engagement, whatever, with empathy and respect.
Okay. So in this asset, there's 4 sections. One of them's passive, one of them's passive-aggressive, one of them's aggressive, and then one of them's assertive. The one thing that this is the first time I saw the asset is when we were live on the call with those potential clients. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like the label of assertive.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people see assertive as not centered and like overly pufferfish and that kind of thing. So in this digital asset, Pretty Girl, let's give an example of each of these. So do you have a client who tends to be passive?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a client that comes to mind right away. She is someone that really, she struggles to express her needs. She struggles to communicate what's truly on her mind, what she truly thinks and feels. And a lot of her relationship challenges has come from, we actually had a really great breakthrough today, actually, come from a part of her that has developed a passive style of communication out of self-protection, because she grew up with a really abusive father who, if you were to actually assert your needs or your boundaries or what your wants or desires were, she would get lashed out at and actually like beaten and verbally abused. And so she developed a passive communication style where she apologizes for even saying like, oh, hey, can you take me to the gym? I'm so sorry to bother you. Like, she's overly apologetic. That's the tendency that usually comes forward. And
when
it's
you
like
say, can you take me to the gym, does she not have her own car?
If she needed a ride somewhere, she does have her own car. But if she needed a ride somewhere because of her car breaking down, or it was in the shop and she had to ask her partner or she had to ask someone else, she would literally apologize in advance and put every type of communication that she would have like a precursor in between. She would be super apologetic for whatever it was that she needed, even if it was tiny. And so her passive type communication style has essentially gone for so long that her needs and her wants and her desires have just gone wildly neglected. So what we've been working on is boundaries, but the way in which she communicates those boundaries are with an assertive type communication.
And by assertive, we don't mean aggressive. We
None
mean
at all.
assertive
Big
as
difference.
centered. Okay, so think of assertive as the green. Think of passive aggressive, and aggressive as the less effective, conducive to growth of communication styles. Is that fair?
I think anything that's not that assertive is not conducive.
Agreed. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I want people to... Assertive is really not the right label, in my opinion, because a lot of people that are super assertive are actually narcissists.
They're actually aggressive.
They're actually aggressive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again, at the end of the day. Okay. So you had that, we just did passive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have a client who comes to mind about who is passive aggressive?
Yeah. Actually more of a client than a person. And someone that comes to mind that is passive aggressive is this person in particular. They cannot speak at all, whether it be their intimate partner, whether it be their children, whether it be people that they're talking with on the day-to-day in passing, without throwing in a passive aggressive comment and or communicating in a passive aggressive way.
Can you give us an example?
So a great example is, you show up to their house and they would say something along the lines of, we already had breakfast, or we already had dinner. Sorry you missed it. Kind of something like that. That's a passive aggressive comment that essentially is a guilt trip, because they're acknowledging that you're late. They're acknowledging that they had to wait for you, but ultimately they don't feel as though they could express deeply, vulnerably that, hey, you said that you would show up at this time and I feel hurt that you didn't honor your word. Instead of actually addressing that, the passive aggressive communication showed up and is primarily the way in which they present. And so you'll feel like someone just kind of pinched you. On the surface, it might be like, oh, ha, 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 whatever. But like, it's those things that kind of, I would say, like slide underneath the rug that like later you're like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
And so when I interact with this person, very often is it really cordial and fun and light and kind of like levity. But like after you leave an interaction with someone who's passive aggressive, you kind of find yourself being, what the heck just happened?
And why did they say that way? And what was the energy is typically, it's almost like
off.
The words and the energy don't match.
Exactly. So
right?
I want to, per this digital asset, I want to make sure that I call it a couple of things. So the emotional dishonesty is a front runner of why you feel it's off.
Are we going to put this digital asset in the show notes as well?
I think it would be important for the listeners to be able to take a peek at.
Okay.
They're indirect. Passive aggressive people are indirect. So you don't just front and communicate your needs. You like go around the bushes, you beat around the bush, and then you just hammer it.
So let me give an example. So if Emilia and I were planning on dinner at 7:30 and she got there at 7:45, instead of saying, hey, sweetheart, I feel a little hurt that I wasn't a priority, and I really wish that you had made me more of a priority and planned for this and we're on time, it would be sort of like, hey, where you been?
Nice of you to show up.
Yeah, nice of you to finally get here. I can't stand this communication style.
This is my least favorite.
It's
I think
brutal.
I'd take an aggressive communicator over this.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Ultimately, because at the deep core of a passive aggressive communicator, they're ultimately self-denying their own experience. And that's what's the most insidious about this.
Yeah.
They are denying themselves of what their inner thoughts truest feelings are. And so they literally cannot communicate it to themselves. And therefore, if they can't communicate to themselves effectively, they sure as shit can't communicate to their partners.
Because if they don't know how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way, they're not going to be able to communicate that to others. And that, okay, what do you recommend for someone out there who might have a partner who is passive aggressive? There's one person from my past I'm thinking of. He was a friend of mine, and I couldn't fucking stand. We lived together for a short time, me and this guy, and I couldn't stand the fact that he was this way. It was almost like you never actually tell me what you really think.
Yeah.
You just kind of want to control me with this weird sort of energy.
Yeah, you can't, you really cannot build an effective relationship with someone who's passive aggressive because they're always shifting, and ultimately they're shifting their experience and using these tactics of communication style that never really have a strong foundation, and ultimately it's at the other person's expense. So they'll even self-enhance a story, or they'll be overly they'll you ever find those people that are just constantly shifting the story to whatever circumstance they're in?
Narrative completely.
The narrative shifts. So you never feel like you can fully develop a relationship with this person. So if you're in a relationship where your partner is passive aggressive, a great way to start to kind of acknowledge that is, number one, when you receive a communication inbound from them to you, you take a moment, and instead of like returning it, because usually you'll be like, okay, I'm going to go throw a communication back, because usually it kind of stings you in some way. Pause and share with them what the impact of that is. So for example, if you say, right, let's repeat that experience where, oh, nice of you to show up at dinner. I would pause in that moment and say that was really hurtful and felt like a backhanded welcome. So you actually have to call out this behavior from a place of not attacking that person.
Is there a value in questioning it too, of do you actually feel that way, or are you just saying that?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I think that never putting a thumb on that behavior, it allows someone who's in a passive aggressive communication style to continue that passive aggressiveness.
Yeah, agreed.
And if you don't interrupt the cycle, like everything, even in the passive or even in the aggressive, if you don't interrupt the communication style to check in on, whoa, is that really what you had meant? Or did you mean something else? If you never interrupt that cycle, the communication style won't change.
Okay. For anyone out there watching or listening, assuming you're not driving, make sure you check out the show notes and download this digital asset with all four. Again, passive, there's passive aggressive, there's aggressive, and then there's what's known as assertive, which we're going to call centered effective communication. And I'm going to transcode it to that. Centered and effective. Okay.
Hi, I'm Derek, and I just wanted to talk about relationship talks with Alan and Emilia. If you're looking to get some help on working with your relationships, you should definitely give them a shot. They can help you identify certain patterns on things that maybe you didn't realize that you've done or that have happened. And if you want to be able to just start really kind of narrowing down the things that you can work on now that'll help you be more efficient for future relationships or even the one that you're in, they're definitely the ones to go see, as clearly they lead an example of what a great relationship should look like. And just in general, they're both incredibly intelligent and smart with just being able to pick out the things that maybe either you missed or that you knew but didn't really quite click yet. So you should definitely give them a shot, because they're very, very helpful and efficient at what they do.
Now we've done passive aggressive. What is an example of aggressive communication? And I think that, just to take ownership here, because I don't want to just talk on the Conscious Couples podcast having arrived, our communication is totally perfect and we are amazing. What I'd rather do is be honest with this, of I tend to be passive, and I don't think I do much passive aggressive, really. Very rarely, but I think that sometimes I can shift into aggressive if I've been passive for too long.
Yes.
And so I don't think I do passive aggressive. I think I do passive or aggressive. And I do think that most of the time when I'm resourceful, I'm assertive or centered or effective.
Yeah.
And I do think that one of the reasons you were scared to live together is because you were afraid of the passive aggressive stuff. And
all the guys that I dated in the past were passive aggressive or just straight up aggressive. I didn't have a lot of passive partners.
Well, makes sense. Yeah.
I probably came off as very aggressive to them.
Well, you were probably passive and then aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, also one of the things for someone who's passive or passive aggressive, when you actually are assertive, they deem it as aggressive. And that's a really quick loop for gaslighting. That is a whole nother
Yes.
episode.
Well, I do want to clarify this. I've dated you for 5 years, my love of my life. You are not passive aggressive at all. You are either passive. You're 90% of the time, Emilia, from my perspective, is assertive, centered, effective, green.
Yeah.
Green.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely.
I try.
And if you are ever passive for too long, aka you let frustrations build up, you'll be passive and then you'll jump to a little bit aggressive, but you'll never be passive aggressive.
Yeah, I try
Not never, but very rarely.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why is because that's hurt you so much in the past. And so
100%.
for the listeners out there, identify yours, identify your partners, and we're going to try to help you navigate this. At very least, you'll be able to break the patterns because you can actually recognize them.
Right.
Okay, so last but not least here, what's aggressive?
So the last one, this aggressive communication style, this tends to etch into what we've talked about on this podcast before, which is the violent communication style. And it's violent because of how aggressive it is received.
Oh.
Is this connected for you?
Yeah, I just realized that you and I, there's someone from both of our past who does the passive aggressive, and when that doesn't work, it's aggressive as hell.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why I think my tendency is passive, is because yeah, it's a lot is connecting for me in real time here. This is a very powerful
Love
asset.
it.
So everyone please download the asset again. I know I've said that before.
Yeah.
Read these thoroughly because this is life-changing stuff that we didn't learn in school.
Yeah. So aggressiveness, like at the root of this, ultimately, this person has a deep belief that their needs, their wants, their desires are in their rights, quote unquote, need to prevail above anyone else's. So there's not an inherent respect that someone else's needs, wants, desires matter more. It's kind of a dominant position of communication. And you can notice it by having elevated levels of energy for a communication style. So let's say you're getting home from work and you guys are just, detailing your day, going through what happened in your day. This person that is aggressive in their communication will often have heightened levels of inappropriately honest and direct expressive language that in some way, shape, or form has attacking elements in it, in attacking others.
How does someone recognize that, pretty girl? Because I think that if you're used to this, so for anyone who grew up with an aggressive, overly dominant caregiver, or someone in their past that bullied them or disrespected them or whatever, anyone out there with low self-worth who tends to be passive, how do they identify when they're being mistreated?
It's a great question. Ultimately, it's...
Do you have any clients who deal with this?
I do. Yeah.
Can you share something?
Everyone is so different in the way in which they're handling the situation at large. But I would say, for example, a client that I do have that's coming to mind, that their partner, their communication style is definitely aggressive. They literally come from a family whose communication style is aggressive. Like there is no passive aggressive. There is no passive. There's no assertive. It's just hardcore to the throat. And she comes from a family that's actually more passive in nature. And so this person, the way in which he communicates, it is always blaming someone else.
Wait a minute. So so your client comes from a family with aggressive communication or
my client's partner.
Okay, your client's partner comes from a family
Of
that was only
communication
aggressive
style.
and your client does not. Okay, so they have different Richter scales.
Exactly.
Okay, go ahead.
Which is another episode that I think we should do. And so this person, and this is not only this person, but in general, aggressive communication style is always pointing the finger outwardly, always blaming, you'll notice, always blaming someone else. There's never really inward humility and ownership and accountability. And this person, because of the fact that they're blaming, the way in which they communicate is to try to ultimately control or attack other people. So if you're not in or operating within the realms of their control, or you're not being compliant with the way in which they want you to be and act, then they'll start attacking you. They'll start attacking anyone that is acting outside the zones of compliance, for lack of better words. And ultimately, this type of communication style it's really harmful because of the fact that this person will go to many
How does
ways.
someone know that someone is doing aggressive versus just truth assertive?
Because they have no consideration for your needs in the matter. So they'll go and get their needs, their wants, their whatever they feel entitled to.
Can you give us an example?
Met at the expense of anyone. So for example, if this partner, the one that I'm thinking of for my client, they want to play video games, right? They want to play video games, but yet his partner just got home from work and she, for lack of better words, is exhausted and she doesn't want to have to clean the house and there's still dishes in the sink, but he wants to play video games. So the way in which he communicates to her is something along the lines of, babe, there's dishes in the sink. I need to go play video games. Can you figure it out? That's not my problem. Honestly, I know that you just got home from work, but like I've been wanting to play video games all day. And like their body language is aggressively pointed towards this client. And then as soon as they're communicating what their needs are and essentially asserting that dominance and controlling behavior, leaves. And so the way in which not only communication style from a verbal standpoint, tonality standpoint, vibrato standpoint, are they trying to make sure that their needs are getting met, but also at the expense of this client, at the expense of the person, and then they leave.
What
so
do
they
you
don't
advise
allow.
for that client?
And
we just FYI, love. I'm sorry.
I know you have a client,
I have a
so-
client in 4 minutes, so just
high,
I'll wrap up with
high level. You really can't tolerate. Well, my client, what I've advised with her is that she calls out the behavior and then she removes herself, because in that form, it's not fair for her, given her communication style, to try to like meet head to head on that.
Okay.
So ultimately,
So she sets a boundary of some kind. Okay.
If you talk to me in that manner again, like this is not going to happen,
Nice.
or your voice is way too loud. I need you to come down to a 3.
Okay. All right. So, and in the past, whenever I was at all escalating, Emilia would just say, "Hey, you're escalating a little bit here," and then I would recognize it, and I'd go, "Oh, okay. Let's take a minute. I'm sorry. My apologies. I wasn't trying to get any aggressive energy."
Yeah.
All right. So, last one. I got to jump. The centered, effective communication. Give us the quickest possible example of what that looks like and how to stay in that zone and how to recognize when you're not in that zone.
I have needs, you have needs. I have rights, you have rights. I have wants, you have wants. I have desires, you have desires. I respect your wants and desires, and I respect mine. Both of those can coexist at the same time. So,
Nice.
babe, I understand that you want to play video games, and I understand that that's a way in which you cope with the stresses that you have in life. And I also understand that I have needs and I'm exhausted from work, and I don't want to do the dishes right now. And I get you don't want to do the dishes right now too. I'm going to go for a bath. You have fun doing your video games. Can we meet back in the kitchen in about 20 minutes?
Nice.
Something like that. Right, depending on what your energy level is, the word choice, et cetera, that is assertive communication.
And Emilia already demonstrated this on this podcast live. I have a coaching session in 3 minutes. She knows that I have a need that I have to go. And she also knows the listeners are here, and we're here for the listeners, and our pets are trying to get into the studio right now, so we got to jump. But that I think you've demonstrated on this. And I think you and I, a lot of times when we're unresourceful, sometimes it is challenging, but a lot of times I'll say, sweetheart, like we got to wrap up here. Let's rock and roll. So we're doing this centered, effective communication, hopefully in real time for everyone to be able to see as well. And I've said this many times in the past of our relationship is actually better off the mics because we have so many conflicting priorities right now.
Yep.
So anyways, the digital asset will be in the show notes. Thank you so much, sweetheart, for bringing this into our world. And I know that this is work that someone else did,
this
and
isn't
there's
my
research and all that stuff.
Yep,
It's not Emilia's work, but it's really important for this to be brought to people because I never...
Yeah, so much overlaps with
Yeah.
personality styles, different upbringings, family of origin.
Attachment style,
shame and trauma responses. So there's so much more that goes involved.
To be continued, the next episode we're going to do Richter scale, which is what you grew up around versus what your communication style is. So stay tuned for that. We appreciate you. Okay, as always, it's not about you. Oh, also, real quick, Relationship Talks Coaching, the free one will be in the show notes. You can book a free 30-minute consultation with Emilia and I. Make sure you grow together, not apart. Go ahead, love.
Getting on the same page about personal growth is our next Relationship Talks event, February 20th, 5 p.m. Register in the show notes.
The link will be in the show notes to register for that. Please register ASAP Rocky. We will see you there. As always, it's not about you or me. It's about the we. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Conscious Couples podcast. We love connecting with the Conscious Couples community, so please make sure you follow us on Instagram. I am at Evolve with Emilia, and Alan is alazarus88.
Also, if you or your partner resonated with this episode, leave us a review at the link in the show notes, and please share this with someone you love and care about.
Until next time, remember, it's not about you or me. It's about
the we.